how communist is Gen Z? And this is important because I think we all have a particular idea of how woke and how lefty a lot of people in the younger generations are. I know some people think the idea of the generational divides is a bit arbitrary, and I can understand when I was born in, 96? So I'm kind of on the cusp between millennial and Zoomer, so the idea of putting me into one category or the other seems very arbitrary. But between people who've got like maybe 20 years separating the periods in which they grew up in, you can definitely see differences in how they think about the world and how they were socialised. And similarly, we have a premium hangout from a few months ago that Carl did, where he's talking about the difference between Generation X, which is Carl's generation, and Generation Z, the current generation. Well, I think we've got the Alpha generation or something now. Those are the new babies who are being...
I've lost counting because every I think that...
They start to get stupider and stupider names.
Yeah, and we have really fast changes of what generations are. So, I mean, at some point, it just...
Yeah, cultural acceleration has been speeding up massively. But he's talking about the differences. So I thought that would be an interesting one to check out if you want to understand from the perspective of somebody old. And I mean old, like Carl, as opposed to somebody's perspective like myself, who is still young and vital in the world. Then this would be a good video to watch. But moving on. So... like I say, this relates to what will happen in the future once we're all gone. What world are we leaving to our children, and what world is being formed? What opinions does everybody have in the greater world around us? So personally, I want to be honest. I don't want to cope about this situation because I don't think it's looking good. Personally, I've had this discussion with a few people who say that articles like this that I'm going to refer to are cope, and sent me some other articles, but that other article that I've been sent that we're going to look at in a moment also reads a little bit like cope. So what's your experience?
I have to say that, things don't look good, but we have to be optimistic. I know it's a lot to ask. These are difficult times, but I think we have to be optimistic.
And what's your experience? Because obviously you've had some experiences in universities, speaking to younger people who are going to university. What's your experience been with them? Obviously, you were talking politics.
I have to say, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm optimistic, because most students are pretty based.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, how so? Could you give us an example?
Yeah, because the thing is, most students are really interested in talking about things, but the problem is that they feel that they cannot. Now, if they see that you are someone who invites dialogue, they will come and talk to you, and you will have a really interesting discussion. And I very rarely encountered students who were happy with the situation of not talking about things. The problem is, as you said before, it's precisely a top-down imposition of a situation where people don't speak in a university. So I would say that I do see students who have a more conservative leanings. Now, I cannot make a comparative judgment because I wasn't alive. I was born in 1990. I don't know how it was before, but I want to say that the thing is that we have a silent majority and a really loud minority that is backed up by a progressively increasing number of woke stuff. And they incentivize students to just say,
Did you encounter any students while you were at university who were like actively and very dogmatically woke, or would it be a bit of a thing that they would put over themselves?
A few, but most of them were not woke.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Honestly, that's not what I was expecting. I mean, I did, when I was in university, a media degree, so that will have definitely skewed my perspective on what people are like. But I did encounter that most people were, especially because they were looking for careers within the media, they were more than happy to go along with any media narrative that was put forward toward them.
And the thing is, I think that if students were woke, we wouldn't see such crazy attempts, over-the-top attempts, to make students more woke. It is because most students, we have a silent majority of sensible people and a really loud minority of non-sensible people.
Yeah, I think that's the point of the top-down, is that you're hoping that those students who go in and are more conservative start off with will either be convinced or just forced into a position where they feel isolated and alone, so they go along with it anyway.
But even if we don't say that they are conservative, they are really open to discussion. And they're really open to learn and read.
That's honestly very encouraging to hear.
Yes, and that is what I think is the most important thing, because woke people, in my mind, they cannot enter into a discussion. They claim to be Democrats, but they are not. And I'm not willing to give them this term. And I'm not willing to give them the term liberals or progressive. I know that this is, we customarily refer to them as such, but I think that this is a problem. They are trying to mess our relation with the idea of progress, liberty, and democracy. So I'm not willing to grant these terms to them.
Fair play. I mean, that's an interesting distinction between you and I, is that I wouldn't consider myself in favor of democracy, progressivism, or anything like that. But that is still.
But that's the difference.
I still recognise that people who would consider themselves classically liberal would still be much, much closer and much to what I believe in, and also much more amenable to having interesting discussions.
I agree, but I just want to point out, because I think that it's important. Because there's a difference between progress and progressivism. Conservatives are in favor of incremental progress, slow bottom-up progress. It is the progressivism that tries to have a top-down implementation of and fast implementation of politics that is the problem. That is why I'm not willing to give them the term progress. They're completely regressive. They want society to disintegrate into a jungle.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They want that. I just want order. I just want there to be some peace and stability. That's all I'm after. I just want to be able to afford a house. That'd be nice. Afford a house so I can raise my kids in peace and just have a happy life with the wife and stuff like that. That's all I'm after. But anyway, so I was sent. We saw this come out right at the end of 2022. It's an article from The Independent, which I do think honestly is a little bit cope, because the headline says millennials are becoming less conservative as they age, according to new data. And this new data was given by the Financial Times. The Independent, for those not in England, is a very lefty, socialistic kind of website and newspaper in the first place. So they're going to want to skew things in favour of the worldview that their readers want to see. So this was a man called John Byrne Murdoch, looked at a series of US and UK election surveys conducted from 1964 up to 2022. After looking at the data, he discovered how different generations' political perspectives have changed over the years, including the views of millennials, who are people born, between 1981 and 1996. I often see a lot of conflicting about when it ends, but either way, Byrne Murdoch found that millennials in the US are taking much further to the left on economics than previous generations. I'm sorry, due to the fact that they are reaching political maturity in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. It could also be due why they're in favour of greater wealth distribution from rich to the poor. And that's one thing that you can say. Maybe they are going a bit more left-wing economically, and that probably would be because of the fact they see the economic and financial system as it exists right now, and see that it's basically failing everybody but really rich people who are already in great positions to do whatever they want. So, I mean, I don't have to become a socialist to recognise that, but a lot of people see that and they see, okay, the only answer then is socialist economics because that's the only alternative they're presented. But I ask the question, what about socially? Where are they socially? Because you can be left-wing economically, like somebody like I think Peter Hitchens is more left-wing economically, whilst being very, very socially right-wing, like Peter Hitchens is himself. So they don't answer that question. There's other causal factors you can say, including universities themselves annually having twice as many students as they did in the early 90s, for instance, after in the UK... in the UK, we had Tony Blair make it so that they wanted at least 50% of all secondary school graduates to go to university, all that sort of stuff. And the universities themselves can be very liberal and will affect the views of people that are going to them, like we were just discussing then, because it's all top down. There's lots of different factors that you can look into with that. But one of the ways that they were trying to justify this, if you go to the next article, they were referring to this article, which has this graph, which is where they're getting the information from. And what's missing here? So I'll read out. Millennial voters in the UK and US are not following the typical pattern of growing more conservative as they age. But what is the metric they are measuring that by? On the left side, we've got the UK. Conservative vote share by age within each generation relative to national average. And on the right, US Republican vote share by age within each generation relative to national average. Now, I have immediately noticed a big problem with how they're scoring this metric and using it as a measure of general conservatism. Can you also spot what that is?
Well, I mean, does it have to do with the millennial one?
Well, no, it's more just the fact that just because you're not voting Conservative doesn't mean you're not a Conservative.
Yeah.
I hate the Conservatives, and I think a lot of people have lost faith in the Republicans in America, apart from in certain states like Florida as well, where you actually have effective leadership. But just because you're voting for the nominally Conservative Party doesn't mean that they're doing conservative things, and people recognise that. Everybody knows over the past 12 years in the UK, the Conservatives have been pants. They have not done conservative things. They have not done anything that they said they would. They have increased immigration. They have done all these things. So it's more likely that conservative people are just dropping off from voting for them and maybe voting for third parties. So this is cope, as far as I'm concerned, from the Independent at least. I think the Financial Times have just got it wrong because this is a really bad metric. This is rather encouraging if you want to see the Conservative Party in the UK crash and burn because nobody's going to be voting for them soon enough. But this doesn't necessarily prove that Gen Z or millennials are more left-wing necessarily.
I mean, to say something good about it, I would have to check how they understand conservative. Because frequently, you don't know how they understand the term.
Yeah, I think most of the mainstream just equates conservative with a particular party that they view as right-wing.
Yeah.
But then they always ignore the fact that the Overton window always pulls to leftwards, Cthulhu swims left. So the right-wing party, like the Conservatives in the UK, they're about as right-wing as Tony Blair in the 1990s. In fact, actually, they're far more left-wing than Tony Blair was in the 1990s. It's been pointed out again and again. In 2008, for the Democrats, Barack Obama unequivocally said he did not support legislating gay marriage. That's not because he didn't support it in reality. It's because he knew that he wouldn't win as many votes doing that.
It was a tactical move.
Yeah, it was an absolutely tactical move. Then there was this next article, also from The Independent, talking about how Gen Z was twice as likely to identify as LGBT as any previous generation, and this was information taken from the census data. I think we've covered it before, but it's important to go back over, because I don't think that what this proves is that they're necessarily automatically more leftist, just that there are incentives in place, social incentives set by the top-down nature of it, but then reinforced by your peers to identify in such a way.
Exactly. And if we bear in mind that people nowadays can get instantly marginalized by just saying that anything that is not part of woke ideology, yeah, of course they are going to say that they're not less conservative.
Especially,
it doesn't mean that they are not conservative. It means that we are living in a situation where people are incredibly pressured to identify as non-conservative.
Well, I mean, there's another thing here, which is LGBT plus, especially with the plus included. Very broad category.
Yeah.
Can you guess what most people in Gen Z identifying themselves in such a way are actually identifying themselves as?
It begins with a T.
No.
What?
It's bisexual. Because it's really easy to just go, oh, I'm bi. I don't have to be in a gay relationship to prove that I'm bi. I just have to say that I'm bi. You know, I could say that I'm bi, and I'm still engaged to a woman, still going to get married to her. But, I mean, you can just say it, and you can immediately get political brownie points because people go, oh, you're part of a marginalised class.
You would have Owen Jones defending you.
Oh, if only. If only. So it was 4% of the age group saying that they were attracted to both men and women, and that was 4% compared to the extra 2.11% that was left over. So it's only 2.11% of Gen Z are identifying as anything other than bisexual or straight there. So it's actually very small. And once again, bisexual, you don't have to prove anything. You just have to say it, especially because women themselves were much more likely to say that they were bisexual than the men as well, which is just very easy. So once again, it's difficult to tell what this is really saying other than it's a reflection of the incentives that we have at the moment. But then you find articles talking about the opposite direction, such as this Forbes one saying why Democrats should be losing sleep over Gen Z. And this is from 2017, so it's a while back, but they labelled them, if you go to the next one, John, for us, thank you, as fiscally responsible, tattoo-hating, Republican-leaning group touted by conservatives as their best hope for the future and as the antithesis of millennials. This reads like agitprop, Because when you get to the bottom of this article, it turns out that they're saying, okay, what we need to do as leftists is form and organise ways in which we can prevent them from getting even more right-wing. This is agitprop for the leftists reading the article, so they know we need to propagandise Gen Z even harder to make them even more leftist. Now, within Gen Z, I will say there's definitely a group of people who are probably more right-wing than any generation since the boomers, because you've got people like John Doyle, and I don't want to include Nick Fuentes because he's probably a glowy. just gonna put that out there.
Let's stick with Doyle.
Yeah, you've got people like John Doyle and people around him who are really young and really very conservative. He's not afraid to put his opinions out there. He's not afraid to be controversial with some of his takes. You definitely have that group of people, but they seem to me, and perhaps Doyle could correct me if he ends up watching this, but they seem like a minority.
I think that all societies tend to have a tendency towards extremes. And it's like a saying that says that, bad times breed good people. Good people create good times create easy people. Or easygoing people create bad times. I think there is a circle there.
I think it's that Chad times create what was it? Hard times create Chads. Chads create good times create bad bugmen. Bugmen create bodega times.
I'm sure we will be corrected.
I've seen that one about the place before.
Yeah. So yes, I do agree with you that we do have a tendency now for people to be. There are some people who are more conservative, because they are, because we see the state of the world.
Yeah, it's
we
kind
see
of
the
hard to ignore.
Extreme woke ideology that has captured society, and we say maybe there has to be some order.
Yeah, I mean, we recognise that it's kind of a historical anomaly, just how extreme things have got right now. Yeah. So it's a reaction against it, hence where you get, reactionary as a term. But they're not necessarily wrong in doing so. And then the last one I wanted to look at was this Politico article from 2020 talking about 6 things to know about Gen Z. So it's just a few interesting little tidbits and facts here. Say Politico and Morning Consult surveyed 1,000 eligible Gen Z voters between September 17th and 21. This was leading up to Joe Biden being voted in as the most popular president in US history. Separately surveyed 1,987 registered voters of all ages around the same time. They also launched social media call-out that received hundreds of responses, and they found things like Gen Z twice as likely to vote for Biden over Trump. Significant chunk is doing so not because they love Biden, but because there was a backlash to the president, probably because they were told by all of the media that Trump was evil, and they decided not to look into it any further. Almost half of Gen Z respondents to the poll also voted against Trump, rather than Biden. Despite the significant leftward bend, Gen Zs are no more likely to identify as Democrats than registered voters, instead choosing to buck the two-party system and go independent. Gen Z is much less likely than registered voters to think that Black Lives Matter protests specifically are too violent, and also Gen Z mainly gets its news from social media.
I mean, 2,000 people is not a big sample.
It's not a big sample.
Okay, maybe a bit harsh. We have to conduct studies, but I don't think that it's a representative sample.
It's not great, but I do think this is possibly a bit more reflective, certainly of the attitudes that I've seen of people around my age out in the wild. But once again, I might be skewed myself because I have communicated and moved within universities and subcultures which just naturally tend to swing left anyway. But still, these are the sorts of arguments I've seen where most people aren't identifying as necessarily Labour, they're not identifying as Democrat, they're identifying as further left than those, therefore not represented by them.
The thing is that one of the myths that young people nowadays believe, or they have been force-fed, is this postmodern idea that we live in a post-ideological society, and there are no grand narratives. Now that's totally false, because woke ideology is the narrative that has captured people today. So many of them, they may say that we're not conservative because we don't like isms.
That's a fair point. I think more than anything, it's not necessarily the postmodern post-ideology, although obviously a lot of people are just raised to think that whatever ideology that they're raised within is just the normal state of affairs, so they don't even see it as an ideological position in the first place. But I think that Gen Z is simply starting to show the is beginning to show the limits of the left and right distinction in the first place. And many are abandoning traditional moderate positions that have been considered normal over the past 60 years for more extreme positions, both on the left and the right. The right wing is no longer just the position of moderate conservatism. It's people going back to reactionary positions or traditionalist positions. The left wing is no longer just the position of we want moderate social progress. It's we want all the social progress all at once, and we want leftist, communist economics at the same time.
I think that's a ticking bomb. Yeah. And I'm not happy to say this. That's why I think that we should be a bit more careful with what we say, and we should be a bit more critical with, how we speak and what we are told.
Well, that's fair, but I mean, personally, I don't necessarily know if the answer is to bring them back to moderation, because I think the moderate positions have led to where we are right now, because they've let things slide as far as they have. I think we need to understand the system as it stands and how it's broken, because it is obviously broken, no matter how you look at it. Financially, the system is broken. You just need to look at Dan's Brokenomics to look at to understand such a thing. And it does seem to only work, as far as I can tell, for financial and political elites. I don't think the answers to how to solve that are on the left. I don't know if they're on the right, but I know that my instincts are taking me to the right for that. So that's how I stand on that. But that's how I've answered the question, how communist is Gen Z? Probably very. That's as far as I understand.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium videos, this one on conceptions of political freedom. If you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.